am Halli Casser-Jayne, and welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. On this episode of the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, it's Apollo 11. It's Donald Trump. It's to the moon we go this week when I talk with Rod Pyle, the author of First on the Moon, the Apollo 11 50th Anniversary Experience. Rod, the expert on all things Apollo 11. And then, in the second half hour, stick around when I and veteran White House correspondent Matthew Cooper do as we do every week, slice and dice all things politics on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, the podcast posted at hallicasserjayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Rod Pyle has written extensively on the U.S. space program. He works as a writer for the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory and is a frequent speaker at science and technology conferences. He has researched the Apollo landing extensively and has created an experimental learning program based on the leadership and management of the Apollo project for the Johnson Space Center. He has written and produced numerous science documentaries and made numerous media appearances, including on PBS, NPR, and The Washington Post. And now, science author Rod Pyle returns with a beautiful and eye-opening book commemorating Apollo 11, First on the Moon, the Apollo 11 50th Anniversary Experience, with a foreword by astronaut Buzz Aldrin, an exciting behind-the-scenes look at America's journey to the moon. Let's talk with Rod Pyle.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, Rod. How are you? What a gorgeous book. Can I just start with that? I love this book.
Sure.
Nicely done, really. You spent years working on this project, combing NASA archives and more. It's really a fitting setup to the mission celebrating its 50th anniversary. Again, wow. Time flies. And so much has been written over those years. What did you set out to do that was different?
So I had written, I think, 3 Apollo books before this and a number of others on other programs. And I thought, first of all, I just really wanted to contribute something to the anniversary year because I didn't want to be an author who sat that out. So Sterling, bless them, gave me the opportunity to do that. And I said, I'd like to do something that's not just a chronological march through the history of it, which is very tempting to do, but really dive deep into a few different areas of how do you design a lunar landing machine when that's never been done before? How do you design these huge rocket engines for the Saturn V? Again, never been done. You can't just scale up the smaller ones you've been building back in the 1950s because they have a habit of exploding when you're trying to fire them. So that was a huge undertaking. And who are these 3 men that went to the moon? I want to hear from themselves. I want to hear about them from their families. So it was kind of a broader ranging take than I had done in the past. And it was really just a pleasure to do. And again, going to the archives, combing through the material, finding some of these original documents, getting a look at them. Interestingly, when you're working on these things that are about the space race years, going back to primary references is not always as gratifying as you might think because they don't always agree because these people were moving very quickly to get this goal met by the end of the decade. And they weren't thinking about historians and authors looking back 50 years later. They were just trying to get the job done. So sometimes it's really difficult to find the facts that agree.
I was a kid, but I can remember the power of that mission that had it over our lives. I mean, we were all riveted. It was a national moment. And you know what else, Rod? It was a family moment. Give us a quick overview for people who weren't alive. There were a lot of people who weren't on that Apollo mission, and why it was so extraordinarily special.
So Kennedy had issued this challenge in 1961 to the country. I want to land on the moon, a man on the moon, and return him safely to the Earth by the end of the decade. Easy enough to say. At that point, we had exactly 15 minutes of human spaceflight experience with Alan Shepard. Didn't even go into orbit. So that's a pretty audacious goal. And it was really it was a throwdown between the U.S. and the Soviet Union to see, who can prove they've got the better system of government and better technology and better educational system and so forth. And as it turned out, the answer was the United States, but he had to pick a goal hard enough that he was pretty sure we could win. So this was a geopolitical move. So for the next 8 years, we finished the Mercury program, single-person capsule. We moved to Gemini, to 2-person capsule, 2 men inside. And that's with Gemini is where we learned how to rendezvous and dock and all the things we needed to learn before we could do Apollo. And then we start flying the Apollo flights. And again, each step we're only testing these things maybe once or twice before we're heading on to the next step. It was very audacious and daring, very dangerous, almost a miracle that it worked out as well as it did, that we never lost anybody on a lunar flight. But it's just a testament to the incredible dedication and the engineering acumen of these people doing this in an era where computers were still very primitive, and it was as much a matter of art and intuition as it was of the raw science and technology involved. And when I look back at this from a 50-year perspective, it's almost harder to believe now that it worked than it was at the time. At the time, I was a young person, and I just took it for granted. Oh, NASA's smart. But when you look back at an era where we had just graduated from vacuum tubes to transistors, and we're just figuring out how to get computers smaller than a room, it's just breathtaking to me that it worked out as well as it did.
That's how true is that? I was thinking, it was like putting the cart before the horse, or if you will, the rocket before the capsule. Bad metaphor, I'm sure, but when you look back, that's exactly what they were up to. So much manpower, money, drive, commitment. 400,000 scientists and engineers and techs worked on this project. Huge, absolutely huge. Could we do it quite the way that they did it then today? I question that myself. I don't know if we're the same nation.
Well, we're a different nation. On the one hand, you look at the Space Launch System, NASA's mega rocket. They've been essentially trying to redesign the Saturn V, if you count all the engineering time, for about 15 years now. And the problem is there's a lot less money. There are much less resources. NASA's operating on a tenth the budget they had in the mid-'60s and doing easily 10 or 20 times as much with all the diverse programs they have under more constraints. We didn't have the environmental regulations and the working regulations then that we do now. So it's much more challenging. Fortunately, we have private industry coming to the game. We've got people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos saying, you know what? I made a bunch of money on the internet. I liked Apollo. I want to build rockets. And they're designing and flying these things with their own money. So now NASA, instead of having to order things from whole cloth from an aerospace contractor at a cost plus contract, which means it gets very expensive very quickly, now they can go to these new space players like SpaceX and Blue Origin, and increasingly the traditional aerospace contractors, and say, okay, what have you developed with your own money? We'll contract it from you. And it's a much cheaper way of doing business. It gets American industry in the game. And this new space age we're entering, and it really is a new space age, when there's profit to be made, things start to accelerate very quickly.
Interesting.
So that's very helpful
for sure. But I'm thinking back then it was science, and it was new science. So oh my God, right? There was that, and it was politics. These days we seem to have a problem between politics and science. And let me throw this in because you might want to comment on this. At the time, it was really not everybody wanted to spend the money and do this. It was a 50-50, split in the country, what to do next, whether we should go there. Talk about those two things.
So there's a sense that's kind of grown over the years that I was recently editing an article for a magazine that I edit, written by a young person who was saying, America's lost its edge. We were united in our goals in the 60s, and now nobody cares and all this. And I said, you need to recheck your facts, youngster. Look at the Gallup polls in that era. It was about 50-50, just like it is now. That varies depending on how you ask the question. But if you're talking about support of NASA and its efforts, it's about 50-50. And at the time, back in the 60s, this support would rise and fall depending on NASA's public relations and what they were doing. So it rose for Apollo 8 and then fell off a cliff. And then it rose for Apollo 11 and then fell off a cliff. Apollo 13, of course, got people galvanized because we almost lost a crew in space. And then after that, it began to decline. And I can remember very tellingly watching the moonwalk for Apollo 14. There's two people on the moon exploring this crater. They're struggling up the side of this incline, hauling this equipment carrier behind them. And in the middle of that, the 3 TV networks, which is all we had, they cut back to soap operas. They left the exploration of the moon to show me General Hospital and I Love Lucy reruns. I thought, this is criminal. I still haven't forgiven them for that. Fortunately, the next time we do this, we've got the internet and specialized channels, and we'll be able to watch it all day long, which I value greatly.
Right.
But you're right. The support was about the same. And a lot of people felt that we shouldn't be spending this kind of money doing this. But largely the efforts of Lyndon Johnson and the fact that we had a martyred president space program that we were pushing ahead, it did manage to be completed brilliantly.
Right. Three men thrown together for a singular purpose: Mike Collins, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, who, by the way, wrote a foreword to the book. You wonder if any other combination could have made it work from that vantage point, right?
I think so. Deke Slayton, who was in charge of the astronaut office, always said that he treated his astronauts as interchangeable cogs in a system. I think that's oversimplifying it a bit. There were some personal elements that were associated with the decisions they made. And in a lot of ways, you look at the Apollo 11 crew, they weren't the most likely, in some ways, to be picked for that first mission. As Mike Collins put it in some of his excellent writing, they were amiable strangers, but they certainly worked well enough as a team to get the job done. Apollo 12, the next crew, which was headed by Pete Conrad, those three guys were like brothers. Pete Conrad, Al Bean, Dick Gordon. They did everything together. You listen to the downlink from that mission. They're laughing and cracking jokes all the way to the moon. I mean, there was a love between that crew that some other crews like Apollo 11 didn't have. But Slayton was right. He was able to put anybody basically in any position and experience success because they had done so well in selecting and especially in training these people. So it's an astonishing achievement to this day.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Or there's one small step for a man. Which was it, right? I mean, the controversy over something like as poetic as that was, either way you look at it, 2.5 hours was all they spent on the lunar surface. You think about that. And then I go back to, but it wasn't all smooth sailing, my friend, right? There were problems. Felt tip pens. Talk to me.
Yeah. So they're landing, they're heading down to the moon. When they separated from the command module and the lunar module, there was a little pop of air left in that rendezvous, that docking tunnel. And it was just enough to push them downrange a few miles. So little things can make a big difference. So they're coming in for their landing. They've overshot the landing zone. And now the computer locks up. What's going on? It's displaying this error code, 1202 and then 1201. So Armstrong reports that to the ground. They don't say anything. He says, give me a reading on the computer alarm. He's getting a little intense here. And finally, they had scrambled to look it up. It was very, very arcane code that people hadn't thought about much. And it turned out it was just the computer's way of saying, I'm overloaded. I'm going to disregard the less important tasks and just pay attention to the important ones. This was a piece of code written by a brilliant woman at MIT who designed the software in the Apollo computer named Margaret Hamilton. And it saved the day. It kept the computer from crashing, which would have meant they would have had to have aborted. But even once that was done, they're coming down to the landing site. And now Armstrong's skimming across the surface at about 80 or 100 feet because he's looking desperately for a flat enough place to set down. Anything bigger than about the size of a beach ball is enough to cripple the LEM and not let it launch itself when they're ready to go home. So he's skating across the surface, looking for a place to set down. People in Mission Control are getting really concerned because by now in virtually all the simulations these guys have landed, and at the moment that they're down to about 30 or 40 seconds left of fuel before they have to abort, he finally sets down, and there they are. Mission accomplished, we thought. But there were a couple other problems, as you point out. One was they started to get pressure buildup in the fuel line to the descent engine after they landed. A little ice plug had formed in a pipe. And the technicians on the ground are watching this with a rising sense of panic. If this line bursts, is the lunar module going to explode? Just as they were deciding whether or not to tell the astronauts, the ice plug melted and it solved itself. Finally, the last thing which you mentioned is this switch. They're leaving the lunar module. Armstrong bumps his backpack into a plastic switch. It snaps off. They don't see it until they get back after the moonwalk. Unfortunately, of all the switches on the wall, it's the arming switch for the ascent engine. And while the engineers on the ground scrambled to find a workaround, when the time came, Aldrin just jammed a felt tip pen in the hole and reset the switch and basically saved the mission for 39 cents. So that's pretty good value.
Yeah, right. After all those billions of dollars spent on it, it's a little felt tip pen. You got to put it all in perspective. Listen, real quick, out of all you learned, you've been doing this for years. I mean, your research is amazing. Your books are great. What did you learn differently? What about this in this go around, going through all the archives? Was there anything that just popped out that was new for you or you want to leave us with?
There are a few things. One thing that becomes clear pretty quickly is that the primary references don't always agree. These people weren't recording the history for people like me to look at 50 years later. They were just trying to get the job done. So sometimes it can be really difficult and yet rewarding to track these facts down. Going through the photographs that were only released in about 2015, at least in terms of being online, and being able to have those composited together afresh. I hired a very talented digital artist up in Northern California to do that. So having those views that are fresh and new to most of us was really a thrill. And then finally, I think talking to the astronaut kids was really rewarding because they're about my age. And, I wanted to be a kid of an astronaut. I wanted to be an astronaut. The next best thing was to be a kid of an astronaut. So talking to them was just a real pleasure, and getting their perspectives on the landing and the entire program overall was just a blast.
And the men who their fathers were. This book is, we talk about the right stuff. Hey, buddy, this is the right stuff. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. How do you like that for a great ending? Nice to talk with you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Bye-bye. I've been speaking with Rod Pyle, the author of First on the Moon, the Apollo 11 50th Anniversary Experience, with a foreword by astronaut Buzz Aldrin. The book available at fine bookstores everywhere and on Amazon.com. It's Matt and Halli time. Here we go. Matthew Cooper, you and I didn't talk for 2 weeks? I missed you.
It's a rare break in our weekly sessions.
We needed to do that. Both of us were exhausted from all of this.
We did. Happy Independence Day.
Well,
belatedly.
There you go. Independence from politics, I'll tell you what. But we're right back in the thick of it. Boy, you can't blink and it changes these days, things. Which maybe is a good thing. I don't know. But, I woke up this morning. And last night I went to sleep and, things were one way. You wake up this morning and Ambassador Kim, how does he say his last name? Duroch?
I believe that's it, yeah.
Gone, baby, gone. Trump got his way. What?
Yeah, Trump gets what he wants, doesn't he?
It's a little scary.
I'm a little surprised. I thought it could happen, but I thought the Brits would stick by their guy and just let it roll. But I guess they were just too fearful about the special relationship to let these internal memos do anything to disrupt it. But it can't be great domestically to look like you're cowing to Trump. On the other hand, they're going to have a new prime minister before long, probably Boris Johnson, so who will almost certainly send a sycophant to be with Trump. So cutting his tenure short may not have been the worst thing.
I think it was very strange for a number of reasons, and the leak has been thrown out of the conversation.
Right.
I don't think that was smart. I think journalists ought to be looking at where did this thing come from, who did this, and why did they do it, and is Russia involved again? Is this again a manipulation of American?
Well, that's true. It could have had Russian origins, or was it someone pro or anti-Brexit who did it?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely. It's a very strange event, and it definitely merits looking into, as you say.
Yeah. And so I was a little shocked to see, but these days everybody seems to want to step into it on the salacious, it circles around Trump, not around the bigger picture. We are so focused in on Trump, I think we are missing a big picture. And that scares me.
I think that's right. I mean, it should involve Trump a bit because, a normal president, if this had happened, would not have escalated the tensions.
Exactly. Right. True. Very true. But the normal president doesn't sit on Twitter on his throne all morning long.
Absolutely not.
Shooting the shit, if you will. So.
Well, exactly. And they don't usually comment about other ambassadors. In other words, if they want to know their displeasure in a normal administration, maybe the Secretary of State would say something, but more likely, someone farther down the food chain. So it's it's bizarre from the Trump standpoint, but as you say, it's really bizarre from the leak standpoint.
Right, and quite frankly, it kind of punctuates just how crazy the UK is right now, as much as the US is. There's that.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. They've brought themselves to this point of chaos all by themselves, just as we have.
Oh boy, I'll tell you what. Okay, so we're moving on to Mr. Jeffrey Epstein and Labor Secretary Acosta. Oh my gosh, Matthew, how did we get here? How much easier can this all get?
It's really nuts, and I would love to hear your take as a Floridian. And now you're a little farther up the coast, but still
not much farther. That's my old
this has its origins as a legal case in Florida, where the then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, now the Secretary of Labor, cut a very lenient deal with Jeffrey Epstein. Some time back about the, sex charges he faced down there.
Do you remember when New York used to be the center of politics besides Washington?
I do indeed.
Well, it's not anymore. It's Florida.
It's true.
It's Florida. And I think this is one of the saddest, most unreported parts of our political, picture. This is a very corrupt state. This makes the historical corruptions in New York nothing compared to what goes on down here. Matt, you're such a wonderful investigative journalist. I wish you'd come in here and just start circling around the Republican Party here, and it's just chokehold on politics here. Nobody's done it. Everybody's afraid to touch it. That's to be true. That's the truth. Everybody is scared to death to get mired in it. And now that they own everything, right, the Republicans, nobody is gonna. You go back to what went on with this thing with Epstein. It speaks maybe a small amount to that, the beginnings of what was happening, in Florida with politics, but it's something else also. And that is, money is really centered in this state into a very small pool of people. And
I could believe it.
Yeah. And that's what we're talking about here, really. So that small pool of people, in Palm Beach, up in Tallahassee, in certain parts of down in Dade County where this mess goes on. This is it, babe. This is it. This is about what money does in politics and in our court system.
Well, it seems that way. I mean, it's hard to imagine a middle class person getting a deal like this and having the legal muscle to pull it off. Acosta really got a unusual deal, as other prosecutors are saying. He was allowed out of jail 6 days a week for 12 hours a day. It's really, he served only 13 months of an 18-month sentence, and it's quite something. And of course, the Acosta was a presence down there. He became president of law school down there, and it's also worth mentioning all his ties to the people we've heard of before. He was very close to Kavanaugh. Kirkland and Ellis, the conservative leaning law firm, represented him in the Epstein case. There are a lot of connections here. They may not really point to anything criminal, but it gives you a sense of the milieu that Acosta came out of. And I don't know if he's going to make it as labor secretary. The Republicans in Congress did not stand up to support him in any real way yesterday.
All right. First of all, there are a lot of people who are involved in this, those that you name, of course, and then you also get into the political people who are involved on both sides of the aisle, by the way. But I do think you have to go back a little bit to how far back Trump really had, I'm going to put it in quotes, but I'm going to use it, political influence. And who his buddies were, and what he was using them for, and how he was playing, and how much Florida and has to do with how he got where he is today. And I think that is in there as well. I'm curious as to...
I think you're right.
And I think that's also not reported properly.
Yeah, and of course that quote of his that's resurfaced from an Epstein profile some years back, in which he said, "Oh, Epstein always has beautiful girls around him on the younger side." I mean, it was so creepy, and of
the
course,
Lolita Express.
Of course, you're left with the something you say every week. If Obama had done that,
yeah, like goodbye, over in a second, a second. But I
mean, Epstein clearly had a certain amount of hangers on. I don't think this really implicates Bill Clinton or Prince Andrew or others who have.
It does. It already has.
I mean, it has, but I don't think it's proof of,
of their own personal involvement. I mean, Clinton has that the Secret Service were with him on all flights that he took. So
whatever he just said exactly, and he just said he took 4 flights. I don't think the people around him were stupid enough to say it's just 4 flights when there were 25 flights. I don't think it extends beyond that. But,
But
obviously.
again, there is this other aspect to that on Clinton, and that is that the Secret Service never talks. Who was that one I had on my show, the Republican Secret Service guy who finally, broke that protocol a couple of years ago. But the fact is that they don't talk. And so I'm curious.
No, they don't talk, and except for Ken Starr, they're rarely asked to.
Right. So I think there's that in there, too. And Dershowitz, I have to bring him up for a minute, and that is the fact that does protest too much. And was it this morning he said, see, I wasn't in my name wasn't mentioned, which tells me he was expecting his name to be mentioned.
I guess you point to what you can. I happened to overhear him on Martha's Vineyard where he, well, he was just talking to a group of people saying this is all kind of nothing and, kind of complaining about the case. I mean, it wasn't anything terribly revealing. It certainly hasn't enhanced his reputation.
You are listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at HalliCasserJayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on all your favorite apps. You can find the Halli Casser-Jayne Show on your Alexa device, too. Just say the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Oh, and come play with me on Twitter at the Halli CJ Show.
But I'm struck, before we move on, just by how much of our politics is sort of still guided by sex, whether it's Stormy Daniels or this, or, of course, the Clinton impeachment and Andrew Weiner, that sort of sexual proclivities.
Except to say, I mean, that's a really good point, by the way. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't hurt. It hurts everybody except for Trump.
Right. Absolutely.
So figure that out. Tell me why, please.
I think it was sort of baked in the cake originally because he, had the 3 marriages and had been such fodder in New York tabloids, largely because of his own grandstanding, that he was unfaithful and, led a licentious life. And I think people knew that about him. So in a sense,
there's one
almost nothing he added could really seem to shock. But
see, that's where I disagree. That's the part of the picture that I don't understand. You can tell me that the guy is a philanderer, he likes to screw around. Isn't that delicious? Big deal.
Right.
Oh my God. Except when we get
harassment.
Rape.
Well, no question. Yeah, okay. You're right.
So it gets to a point, and then you have to say, now, wait a second, and it's not 1, it's not 2, it's not 3, it's not 4. And these, and the latest, the woman who writes the advice column, who was, a revered character in New York.
No, it's like Cosby. I mean, it goes on for so long that you have women, young women and old women, and
Well, so maybe Cosby will wind up in jail. Maybe Trump will wind up in jail. I don't know. I want to stick with this only on this aspect, and that's that Bill Barr is in the middle of this. There's something weird going on with that Barr thing and him recusing, and then maybe he's not recusing. And
yes, well, Epstein-Barr syndrome. Wasn't my line, but I'll use it. But Epstein did work as a teacher at the Dalton School where Barr's father was headmaster. I don't think that explains Bill Barr's involvement, but it's a curiosity. Look, Barr has shown himself willing to step over traditional lines for an attorney general, and there's no reason to think he wouldn't do something here. So we'll
keep your eye on Bill Barr, because there's a lot about Bill Barr. We're going to get to Bill Barr in a second. We're going to move on now to the census. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I think this is one of those that people cross their eyes when they're hearing it, because it's so it seems so weird.
It's ultimately a question of administrative law, and it's a complicated question, and it isn't complicated at the same time. Ultimately it's about raw politics and whether you use the census to try to, intimidate immigrants for, who may or may not be here in an undocumented fashion. And the Trump administration wants to add this question, keeps coming up with new reasons why they want to add the question, none of which were convincing to the Roberts Court, and we'll have to see what happens next with their latest set of machinations.
Well, it's interesting that that's on the table along with the gerrymandering, which I think came down when you and I were on vacation. Nothing is clean anymore. Not that it ever really was, right, in politics. But this stacking the deck, boy, it's become a career for some in politics, and how to figure out how to play it. And the Republicans seem to do it a whole lot better than the Democrats, as they seem to be doing everything better than the Democrats these days. But we'll talk about that in a moment. Unless you have something further to say, I am moving on.
No, I don't.
All right, I want to go on to Joe Biden. So this was weird. After the whole kerfuffle, if you will, with Harris, his poll numbers are going back up. Interesting. He still holds the lead. He gave an interview along with his wife to CNN, which I watched. Did you watch any of it?
I saw excerpts. I didn't watch the whole thing.
He's so human. She's so human. And if you put him, Trump on stage with Melania, and then you put, good old Joe and Mrs. It's such a, oh my God, there it is. There's America, and which one wins in the end? Just a human kind of, regular kind of Joe guy who survived a lot of politics over a whole long, huge career. I think it's sad that any of his politics would be what is his undoing. But I just, I saw that and I said, at some point, somebody is going to paint a picture or do a cartoon with those two images, and they're just so different. But you can't get him on racism. And we may have talked about it.
We did talk about the
But I want to go back just to say that I think on some levels, what Harris did is backfiring on her a little. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I agree. She's up in the polls, but she did not use the debate moment to great effect afterwards. Right. She essentially wound up agreeing with Biden that this should not have been as dramatically compulsory as it was back in the 70s, by which I'm referring to busing. So she didn't really capitalize on it quite as well as she could have. And Biden eventually got his answers straight. And the press finally seems exhausted on his
beating him up on it.
Collegial ties to segregationists in the 70s, which, look, every liberal in the Senate, including Ted Kennedy, had to have relationships with the senior Democrats in their party, of which about a dozen in the early 70s were former segregationists. So, what Biden did at the time was not exceptional. And at some point, the press has kind of exhausted itself on that. And so I think he's benefiting from that.
Can I just say, to me, it was a story about nothing. It was the press wanting to give Harris her moment, and she earned her moment because, the more obnoxious you are these days, if you will, the more that the camera goes on you and the microphones, hang around your neck. That's very, very true. But even from the African American community, I don't see, from the left wing African American community, I don't see what the uproar was about. Shoot me. I'm not an insensitive person. I don't get
Well, yeah, I have a slightly more charitable view, which is that...
Thanks a lot.
Well, sorry. I mean, I think she did...
Please don't call me uncharitable. I just really didn't get it.
No.
I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. Still don't get it.
I think it was very politically adroit in a debate to do what she did. She stole the mic and used it to great effect. Right. He obviously didn't have a very good answer prepared for what should have been an obvious question. And she executed it, well at the time. But, all that has its limits, especially if she's now echoing a position similar to his. But I agree with you. I think the effort to sort of turn him into a racist or even racially insensitive is not resonating.
It doesn't make sense. That's why it's not resonating. That was my point. Not that I was being uncharitable. Right. But saying to you that to average American, they're going, huh? Where's the story in here? What's this? It doesn't. It was one of those it reminds me of the emails. I guess that's why I'm bringing it up, and how they dealt with Hillary in the emails. And they pounced. It was there may have been more in the email story than there ever is in this one. It just didn't play right with me.
I agree, but once again, the Democrats are now having a debate about a largely discredited social policy from 50 years ago that is never going to get revived. And it's, they're continuing to have debates about things that are not going to happen, whether it's abolishing private health insurance, or reparations, or free college, and it's not a good look for the Democrats.
Well, look, I want to mention before we move on Eric Swalwell, only because he was the first out. Tom Steyer's in, but maybe those points be made. But I think we go back to having to talk about Pelosi here, who seems not controlling her caucus, except in the place that she shouldn't control them, and that's on impeachment. She's fighting with the young'uns, right?
She's fighting with a relatively small group of the young'uns, yes.
She's having a problem, I think, holding in the left wing of the caucus. There's
no question that they're rebellious, some more than others.
Right. This is not good. This is not good. And I have a point to make here, okay? Trump's numbers are up, and I think I know why his numbers are up. His numbers are up because he's not getting badgered by the left anymore. Maybe this will change when Mueller comes to Capitol Hill next week. But in the meantime, it's been like all of a sudden we went from collusion and, obstruction of justice to zero. So nobody's beating the hell out of him. And this brings me to the point that I was desperate to get to you with, and that is this impeachment thing. Again, I think we have to have a different conversation about it. She can call for an impeachment inquiry. That doesn't ever mean she has to bring it to a vote, right? She just has to have it there on the table and play it so that they can subpoena and do whatever the hell they want to do. And my point is this. That is what she should be doing. What they should be doing. And they should be hammering the hell and bloodying up this guy day after day after day after day, because by the time they get around to it now, that'll be just about in time to keep it, where it needs to be. And that's the function here. You don't even have to call for an impeachment vote. You just have to keep beating him up. And if she doesn't, those 44 numbers that he has, which are the highest he's had, they're going to go up to that 50. I'm telling you, Matt, you heard it from me.
I think you make a good case. As you know, I've seen the merit of her approach, of Pelosi's approach of not pursuing impeachment. But I think you make a good case at this point.
So that's what, I'm with you. I've not been impeach the son of a gun because I think that that's a loaded thing. But she does have something in the middle that she can play. And I think in everything that she's been doing of late, what I'm seeing is, as I see the Democratic Party doing it, and the Republican Party too, because this is the issue. Everybody is either far to the left or far to the right. Nobody can seem to find that sweet spot in the center on either side of the aisle. And in that lies the answer to all of America's problems, by the way. I just don't know if we can get there. But take it back to, what's happening in the race, and, the Swalwell's out and the Steyer's in, and, and Joe Biden being, the sanity in all of this. And I say, wouldn't it be nice to just do that, just get back into the center and kind of be there and gentle and just for 4 years. Sorry, I'm on a rant. I am on a rant.
Yeah, no. I hear what you're saying.
Good. So we need to write a letter to Nancy and say, Nancy, just don't call for an impeachment. Just use the excuse that they're not, they're not bringing the people up to speak and not letting them speak, and do your inquiry, and just keep it going. And, drama, honey. Give us the drama on Capitol Hill. And maybe that will cleanse some of this as well. All right.
Could be.
I haven't heard could be in days.
That's my weekly could be.
Thank you for your could be. I feel so much better. All right. Amy McGrath, interesting character. She's going after Kentucky Trump's bitch McConnell. She raised an astonishing $2.5 million her first day for a Senate race. She didn't do so well in the House race, but only by what? She lost by 3 points, I think it was. But his poll numbers are real down in that old Kentucky home of his. But
yeah.
You think she's got a shot?
It's tough. She did not do well in the state's second most Democratic congressional district. Now she's got to run statewide, which is more favorable ground for Trump, where he won the presidential race by something like 30 points. So he's got some McConnell's got some built-in advantages. On the other hand, leaders can get vulnerable, and they've been knocked off before. And I don't see it happening, even though she's got a compelling biography as a fighter pilot and whatnot. But I still think it's tough. And Trump presumably is going to run 20, 25 points ahead of Harris or whoever the Democratic nominee is, and that's going to pull McConnell up. So I think it's going to be tough.
The only thing that I think, I don't know, have his poll numbers ever been as low as they are right now?
I don't know the answer to that, but they're not what you would want for a re-election. But he's got a machine, and he is dogged. He is dogged.
He's ruthless. The guy's ruthless.
And he's ruthless. He's done more to change politics than anyone.
Well, I put him up with Newt Gingrich.
Yes,
on that score. But I think that she might have a shot. Her the biggest reason why she won't have a shot is because the Democrats are just dysfunctional as all hell. I mean, they just don't know how to do it. I'm really getting, I know I am beating up because I just think that they're screwing up already. I mean, this just smells of, everything bad that the Democratic Party, continues to do, including they're ignoring completely the no Trumpers. Bad move. They could get help from that, constituency, and they're willing to vote Democratic if the Democrats don't move their little, tushies to the left so much, and they're just going, we don't need you. We'll get out the vote. Oh, yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they're saying, but I share your skepticism.
Yeah. So, it's a little scary out there. All right. Mike Flynn, that's a little weird, Matt. What's going on there?
Well, it's hard to keep track of it. He entered a plea agreement with Mueller's team in the end of 2017 about his having lied to federal officials about his phone call with the Russians, and that's been going on for a long time. And in the last couple of months, he switched lawyers. He seems to be, fighting, testifying in some other cases, perhaps jeopardizing his plea agreement. He's got the kind of feistiness that suggests, maybe he really does think he's going to get a pardon.
I would say he definitely does think he's going to get a pardon. And I think what's interesting about that is that would indicate to me something that Trump knows something. Mike Flynn can be a problem for him, and he needs him on his side. The lawyer that he's got, you bet your bottom dollar Trump sent that lady in. She's
very activist conservative lawyer now, as opposed to just the kind of
Trump's team sent her in to try and save.
He doesn't have the Washington white collar legal team that he had before.
Right.
It's just very unusual to see a plea agreement sit for a year and a half and still be in doubt. People violate plea agreements by lying or doing other things, but to just sort of get uppity about it, about when you're willing to testify and when you're not.
There's a story here bigger than
I totally agree, but you would think Trump would have had the same leverage at the end of 2017. Something has given him more leverage now.
What could that be? Do. I mean, seriously. I mean, Manafort's behind bars. That's changed some of the story.
No question about it. I think it's a very odd situation, and I am clearly very fluid.
Are you shocked by the fact that Trump has truly proven to one of the most formidable presidents of our lifetime? Nobody can beat him down. I mean, the left touts him as the world's number one idiot. The ambassador, going back to the beginning of this conversation, says, he's inept. How inept is he? Seems to me he has completely squared up, complete control of everything, not just in the United States, by the way, but he seems to be controlling it in the Middle East and in Europe, too. I think we have made a big mistake on how this guy's been reported.
Yeah, I certainly don't think he can be underestimated either with what lies ahead in terms of the election and his policies, but also what's happened so far. He's gotten most of what he's wanted from Congress. He has reshaped the international debate. Some of these trends would have happened anyway, and in some ways he's kind of caved in a sense. He re-ratified NAFTA with only cosmetic changes and just gave it a new name so he can claim credit for it. But you're right. He's had a huge impact. He's going to continue to do that. I don't think that means he's not quite vulnerable to being defeated next time.
Oh, I am not on the. I think he can. I don't think he will be defeated. How's that?
I don't either. I just say he can be, and I think it's questionable whether he's going to get reelected. But
I said something very, some people would go, oh my God. But the fact of the matter is, while everybody is on Twitter and carrying on like lunatics and saying what an idiot and whatever, and, he's a rapist, he's a this, he's a that, he's all the things that he is, he's amassed more power than I can think of anybody in my lifetime in a shorter period of time, but more power. I mean, he's unstoppable. The only thing he hasn't been able to do is get his money for the wall. He's even allowed to go on and continue to cage children and abuse them. That's the story. And how come it's not being written? Write it, baby.
I agree. And, of course, it wouldn't be possible without the acquiescence of the Republicans. I mean...
Well, it doesn't matter how he got it.
He's got it.
He got it. And the other side of that is that I think that because nobody's really reporting the truth and they're just resisting, including the press, acting as, supporters of the resistors, you can't defeat them if you don't get down to the nitty-gritty of it.
No, they're only focused on the chaos and not on the effectiveness. Right.
And they're not looking into how he does it either, so you can understand how he's doing it. Why, in other words, why are these people kowtowing to him? They know what a creep he is. What's he got on everybody? Somebody get in there and see what the hell is going on. How is Mike Flynn being flipped again? It's
Absolutely.
Like, so I say to myself, I'm wrong. I'm throw this out at you. I'm wrong because I'm one of those people who's been, fighting him morally in this way and that way and the other way. How about stop it? How about saying maybe we in the resistance, maybe he's a great president.
Well, I think he's an effective president.
Well,
I think great is a tougher argument.
Well, I don't know. Effective is great versus ineffective.
Hitler was effective.
Well, so, but we didn't like him. We didn't agree with him.
You mean great as in powerful, not great as in admirable.
Oh, well, honey, admirable never goes with Trump.
Right. I just wanted you to clarify your use of the word great for the...
Yeah, I assumed you know how...
I know how you meant it. I just want to be sure your vast audience knew it.
No. So there it is. But I think it's something... I think you have to look at... People have to start looking at it from the reality, not from wishing what it would be.
I completely understand that.
Yeah. So I think that's a moment. And I think that if people don't start doing that, he wins by default because the argument that hasn't worked for the last almost 3 years isn't going to work next year either. You got to change it.
I agree with that.
Okay. So I just thought, I wanted to do a shout out before we close, but I do want to bring up very quickly, something. They're back in court on Obamacare, Matt, which the public is very much in favor of. New polls came out this morning on abortion. 68% of Americans on both sides of the aisle do not want abortion rights taken away. And yet this administration is hammering at Obamacare and on abortion. And I find that something that we need to explore and to why they would go down a route that really doesn't, work for them in the long run. I find that utterly fascinating. And at the end of the day, it's going to have a lot to do with the woman's vote, too. So will you put that in your cap and think about that, and we'll bring that back up again when we talk next time. I wanted to put a shout-out to Rod Pyle. He really was an amazing character.
Absolutely.
And showed us that those independent runs can be important. So rest in peace, Mr. Rod Pyle. Yeah, on my notes, I had the last thing was, can Trump be stopped? Matt, can Trump be stopped?
Well, I believe he can be defeated in less than 2 years. Yeah, I think he can be stopped. But while he's in office, I think he's proving to be very effective, as you said. And so I think, they're right. The only way to stop him is to defeat him.
Anything you wanted to say that I didn't bring up?
No, I'm just so glad that we're keeping the number of Democrats at 25 in the race, and maybe we'll do a session on the mayor of Miramar at some point.
It's pathetic. I guess we should give Eric Swalwell for he's historic. He's the first one to drop out.
Yeah, well, a smart man.
And Steyer, I'm not sure why he got in. If you could tell me that, I'd be happy to hear it because I don't get it.
Well, I think they all look in the mirror and say, "Well, if Trump could do it, or if why not?"
That's Trump's legacy. All right. Well, what are you going to do? On that note, my dear, it's been Swalwell.
See you next time.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is a production of Resec, LLC. Be sure to tune in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show at hallicasserjayne.com or listen on your favorite app. New podcasts are posted Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern.